In our last video, we prepared this document and set up our menus. So now we're prepared to start doing some work in Illustrator. And this video is going to be just going through all of the tools in the left-hand panel. And then after that, we'll work on how to customize the objects once you've created them with these tools. So the first couple in the tools panel are the selection tool and the direct selection tool. And they have different functions. In order to use them, I need to make a shape quickly. So I've made a black circle. I'm going to make it pink. The selection tool can be selected using V on the keyboard. So if you roll over any of the tools in the panel, you'll see what it's called, and then also how to select it using a key on the keyboard. So for direct selection tool, it's A. For selection tool, it's V. So for example, if I had the shape tool selected and I said V with my keyboard, it would give me the selection tool. So the selection tool, you can click on objects or deselect them by just clicking off of them. And then you can also use it to adjust your shape with the handlebars on it. And this is true for any of the objects that you would create in here, if it's an image or type or a vector. So here, I'm using the handlebars just to change the shape. And true for Illustrator and other Adobe programs, if you hold Shift, something will change, and in this case, it will keep your object proportional. So if I click Shift, press Shift, and use the selection tool to change the shape, you can see that no matter where my cursor is, even though it looks like it's going in a direction, that's with Shift, without Shift, and with Shift, so it's keeping it proportional. So that's the selection tool. Oh, you can also select, so if you have like multiple objects, you can click in an area and then see how it's creating this like gray outline. So you can select multiple objects at once. And then the direct selection tool, you can select using A. So I was in selection tool, and I'm switching to direct selection tool by pressing A on my keyboard. It has similar functions to the selection tool, but it has sort of a deeper selection option. So you can select an object just by clicking on it, and you can move it. But then you see the arrangement of blue selections is different for this case. So, and this is where you start to see the vector versus raster in Illustrator. So like I mentioned before, the objects are made of points and curves. So these are the points on the object, these 4 dots. Let me zoom in a little bit. So these are the points, and then these handlebars control what the curves look like. So you can pull this out to create a wider curve, or you can pull it in to create less of a curve. And so these handlebars control what happens with the curves attached to this point. And then when you're selecting a point, it will also give you the handlebar connected to the adjacent point. So I can adjust this one as well. Let me give it a circle back. I would definitely suggest playing with the points and handlebars using the direct selection tool, so you start to get an intuition for how these types of curves work and how you can manipulate them to make them into a custom shape. So I can make this circle into a bean shape using just using the selection tool. I have more of a bean. So yeah, definitely go ahead and create shapes and then start to use the direct selection tool to manipulate it. It will help you also understand how the pen tool works, which is the next tool that I'm going to go over. So pen tool is how you can create custom shapes with points and curves like the circle that we've already made. And I can create something, I won't be able to do perfect, but I can create a circle using the pen tool just by creating the similar curves. But pen tool also allows you to make more custom shapes. So it was harder for me to create this bean. I mean, it was fine to create this bean from a circle, but I could also create something that looks more like the bean of my dreams if I use the pen tool right away. Maybe it's not the bean of my dreams. Pen tool is sort of like hard to manipulate, and it definitely takes some work to draw with it. Yeah, this more looks like a phone than a bean. So the best way to understand is that, let's delete this. So with the pen tool, it's essentially based on you draw a point and then you draw another point, and that makes a straight line if you do nothing. And if you click again to make that next point and drag your mouse, you're still holding down, but you're dragging it, you're going to create a curve. So, and then pen tool starts to assume what the next curve that you want should be, just by where you're placing the point. And it's hard to intuit until you had some experience with it. And I would suggest playing with it if it's something that you're interested in using. So it's all based on this sine cosine curve, and essentially it always assumes that if you draw one point, the next point is going to be this type of curve, and then the third point will create the opposite. So you can draw with pen tool. A shape. And when you can close a shape by, like when you roll over a point, you can see this little circle comes up. That means it's going to close that shape for you. So now I have this oval. And more with pen tool is you can add anchor points to it. So you could add this here. You can add another one. And you can delete points. So these are for highly custom shapes with like an intense amount of mouse control. So where you're drawing every curve and line, and the computer is assuming nothing other than this like sine cosine formula for the lines, for the anchor points and curves. Little annoying and hard to grasp. Would definitely recommend just playing with it to try and start to get an intuition again. So yeah, once you have a shape, you can manipulate it with any of the other selection tools like I am here. I can move this point in, we can change this curve to this. An example, so like this, when I deleted the other point, became just a 90-degree angle. And so with the anchor point tool, I can select that point and drag, and it will add the handlebars for me, so I can have another curved shape. So this is starting to look like a heart. I'm gonna make it look more like a heart. Yes. So, and then once you have a shape created with the pen tool, if you're like me, you start to see these like wonky corners and curves and feel like, oh, I need to like smooth those out. There's a tool for that. So it's the smooth tool, and you can select it from the panel. And then if you hold Command or Control, you'll get the selection tool, so you can click on your object and then let go of Command or Control. And now you can edit that curve to start smoothing it out. And you see the anchor points sort of jump around because this tool is sort of assuming that you want this curve to be smooth rather than angular. So now I have this really smooth heart. This one's feeling, yes, perfect. So that's the pen tool. Just play with it. Just another way to create objects here. So then there's this line segment tool, which is essentially just to create straight lines. And if you hold Shift when you use the line segment tool, just getting my colors in order here. Okay. So now make this extra big. With the line segment tool, you can make your line in any direction. If you hold Shift, you'll get 45 degrees or 90 degrees from your first point. So 45, I'm holding Shift now, and it will only go 45 or 90 from that point. So that's the line tool if you want to make just straight lines. And then you can go back to the pen tool. If you've created these straight lines, you can go back and use the pen tool to connect them. See how the like anchor connection comes up? And it assumes the look of the two lines that you're connecting. So I can use pen tool together. So now I have one whole shape there. Okay, so type tools, there are two essentially. One is the area type tool, and the other is the point type tool. So if you select the type tool, you can also select using T on your keyboard, and just click your mouse. It will create some type in Latin. This is probably best for working on titling or short phrases. So the majority of your type would probably be best as point type in this case. So it's given me some type, not what I want. So I want the title. And once you have created something with point type, you can select it like you would any other object and use the handlebars to change its size. So here I'm using the selection tool again to edit this object, which is type. And then if I hold Shift, it will be proportional. So no Shift, Shift. Now I can increase it to any size that I want, and it will still be proportional. You can skew type this way. I wouldn't recommend it, just depending on what the use is. And we'll talk more about how to work with type in the future. So, and then okay, so that's the point type tool. You use that for titling. And then there's the area type tool. So with area type, you click, oops. So with the type tool, you can create area type using the same tool, but instead of just clicking once to make a piece of type, you click and then drag, and it creates a box in which it has a bunch of type, and it fills it with lorem ipsum, this like fake Latin placeholder type, which is kind of nice because then you can sort of play with it before you actually put your real type in and decide how much you have space for. So I'm using a selection tool to edit the size of this box, and nothing about the type inside of it is changing. It's still the same size, but it's changing how much type is actually fitting in this box. So you can see this little red plus sign. It means that type is running over here. All of the type that I have in this box is not fitting inside of the shape that I have created. So if I click and drag and extend that box, then now all the type that I have is fitting well into this box. Maybe not, like now I have all this extra space at the bottom, so maybe I want to have it fit more. So that's perfect. So in this case, you can go to, let's go Shape Up Design book. I think this is part of our assignment. So you can go grab some type and put it in this box. Now you have the type that you need. I need to include this type, but I want to make sure this box is the right size for it. So those are the two type tools. There's area type and there's point type. And we'll talk more about how to edit type in Illustrator in the panels discussion. So then let's work on, just the shape tool. So there's multiple shape tools available here: rectangle, rounded rectangle, ellipse, polygon, and star. My guess is you'll be needing rectangles and ellipses, polygons the most. And the rounded rectangle you can get to easily from just creating a rectangle. So let's start with that one. Let me move some stuff out of the way. Look at this beautiful creation. Okay. So now I have a clean slate, sort of. I want to create a rectangle. So now I have a rectangle. I can duplicate. This is true in Illustrator and other Adobe programs. You can duplicate by clicking Option, and you see two arrows come up. So you can click and drag, and it creates a copy of whatever shape you have. So now I have a rectangle. I want a rounded rectangle. Illustrator has these fancy new, these like curved corner bits where you can just click on it and drag it to the curve that you want it to be. So now I have this like pill shape just by having created a rectangle and working with these corner adjustments. So I can go all the way back to almost, yeah, and it's still, once you add the curve, you can't go back to it, back to a 90-degree angle without editing the shape. But let's keep this pill because I like it. Okay, so then, and then the ellipses is the same. And remember, you can use Shift to create a proportional shape, or you can not hold Shift and it will create an ellipses. And now that I have an ellipses, if I hold Shift, it will just scale proportionally. It won't go back to a circle. It will just scale proportionally from what you already have. So I want this really tiny ellipses. Okay. And then you can also, with direct selection or with the selection tool, you can rotate. So you see this like little rotation corner comes up, and it tells you the angle at which you're rotating, and you can rotate to any angle you want. If you start wherever you start from, if you hold Shift, it's the same. It'll have this like similar effects on the shape where you go. It will only change to 45 or to 90, or to 135 or to 180, 225, 270, 315. So increments of 45. So let's say I want to change this by 45 degrees. And then I want to multiply it. So I say Option, and click, and if you hold shift, it will create the shape either 90 degrees or 45 degrees from where you started. So I'm holding option and shift together here to move the shape in the way that I want. Okay. And then let's do polygon. So the default is 6 sides. But if you select the polygon tool, and this is the same for the other shape tools, if you just click, it will ask for you to input these measurements, so these constraints for the shape that you want. So let's say I want the radius to be 2 inches and I want to have 8 sides. So you can customize this shape with, using numbers rather than having to estimate it based on what you have here. I'm turning my rulers back on. So if you can hold it, back up to your rulers, and it's 2 inches radius from the point in the center. And then star tool is very similar. I'm usually creating those by clicking and then customizing. So the radius 1 and radius 2 are the internal and external radiuses. So the more contrast between those two, the more contrast in the star you'll have. So if I do a 2-inch inner radius, and then a 2.1 outer radius and 5 points, it's not a star. Let's do a little more contrast. So let's do 2.5. Still not quite what I'm looking for. Okay, here we go. So this one looks more like a star, but you can make some more space. So you can do many, many points. You can do 100, and you get this like sunburst. Might need that sometime. Okay, so then after all these shapes, you can also use, if you want to draw, instead of using Illustrator's vectors to create shapes, you can also just draw them with your mouse using the paintbrush tool. So if you select the paintbrush, which is also B, you can draw custom shapes. So now this will probably be the bean of my dreams. Well, it's pretty good. Don't like that curve so much. Let's smooth it out. So even with the brush, you're still creating these vectors. So side note, when you have vectors that are not joined together, this bean is two separate, it's one line, but they're not connected. So you can select 2 anchor points, and Command J or Control J will connect them. So then I can use Smooth Tool to kind of make this a little smoother on there. Look at that bean. My goodness. So yeah, you can draw any shape you want. And you can see in the control panel at the top, your customizations are coming up for this tool. So if I want to make it a fatter brush, I can say 7 point. If I want to change the color, I can change it here. If I want it to have these varying width profiles, I can say this one. That's not what I thought that would be. So I need to select a different. Oh, So it looks like it doesn't work with the round brush to change these profiles. So let's see if you can see it better. Yeah. So there are these brush options in here, and there are more you can download from the web. There are some more loaded in here. Open Brush Libraries has a bunch of different ones. You can explore which ones are interesting or work well for your project. Generally, I just use the basic one or whatever round option I have. Cool. And you can draw a type this way. You can draw a circle. You can draw shapes of any kind. So that's a brush tool. Another one I would suggest playing with to understand more about it. And then, so we've talked about deleting points, and that's a good way to sort of erase something you don't want anymore. I mean, you can select it and then delete it to get rid of a whole shape, or you can use the direct selection tool to select some points and just delete those. So you saw I clicked and dragged to select only some of those points and then just deleted them. You can do the same even in the middle of a curve. So you can select individual points and just delete them that way. You can, which I would recommend. And then I would also say there's an eraser tool. Where you select it. Excuse me. So once you have the path selected, you can just go over the points you want to get rid of and it will delete them. So you can get rid of points that way. And another Illustrator / Adobe thing in general is if you have all these separate shapes and you want them to move together, so like say I don't want to be able to select this object, I can move it individually, but if I click all those shapes and say Command G, or I can right click and say group. So grouping just helps to keep objects together in Illustrator. So here I've grouped them. Now if I select one, I select all of them and they move in unison. That helps to like keep things organized in your documents. Okay, I think that is good for tools. And then we'll get into customizing and editing these shapes in the next video.